Part 1: The Scorch Mark. The air in the Atlas Grill was thick with the scent of aged Scotch, beluga caviar, and the quiet, lethal hum of New York's high society. Eleanor Vance, standing in a gown the precise shade of midnight blue that Marcus Sterling insisted upon, felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was their engagement party, an event meticulously orchestrated to serve as a soft launch for Marcus's upcoming senatorial campaign. At 30, Eleanor was a rising star at Starling and Associates, known for her visionary, minimalist designs that were reshaping the city skyline. Tonight, she was supposed to be the perfect, brilliant accessory to the next governor. She just hadn't realized how quickly accessories could be replaced. The clinking of a champagne flute silenced the room. Marcus, polished and radiating the false sincerity of a career politician, stood beside the ice sculpture of a swan, his arm conspicuously empty where Eleanor should have been. Instead, he was flanked by his campaign manager and a stunning, glacial woman in emerald green, Serafina Rhodes. Serafina, the heir to the Rhodes industrial empire, possessed not just vast wealth but a political network that ran deeper than the tunnels beneath Manhattan. Eleanor watched from the edge of the room, a glass of water growing warm in her hand, as Marcus's gaze swept over the crowd, landing on her with an expression of thinly veiled contempt. "My friends, my dearest supporters," Marcus began, his voice amplified just enough to carry over the background music. "Tonight was meant to celebrate a promise. But ambition, as you all know, demands truth. And the truth is, the future of this state, my ability to serve you all, requires absolute stability and unparalleled resources." He paused, letting the implication settle. The photographers, hired for the engagement, were suddenly turning their lenses from the floral arrangements to Eleanor. A cold draft seemed to blow through the warm restaurant. "Eleanor Vance is a remarkable architect," Marcus conceded, a statement that felt like a burial eulogy. "But the demands of public office are far too great for a mere architectural partner. They require a dynastic union. They require the kind of power that only the Rhodes name can guarantee." He turned, taking Serafina's hand. The massive, flawless diamond ring that had been on Eleanor's finger just hours ago now glittered mockingly on Serafina's. "I am announcing tonight, not an engagement to Eleanor, but my new commitment to Serafina, my true partner, and to the future of this great state." A ripple of nervous, calculated applause spread through the room. It wasn't just a cancelled engagement, it was a public execution. Marcus hadn't just broken up with her, he had justified the breakup by declaring her talent, and her entire existence insufficient for his political ambitions. Eleanor felt the gaze of every powerful person in the room, her colleagues, clients, and rivals, weighing her down, condemning her not for being wronged, but for being weak enough to be discarded. The room dissolved into a sickening blur of pitying glances and rapidly averted eyes. She didn't need to hear the gossip to know what was happening. Her name, already associated with Starling and Associates, Marcus's family's firm, was now a scorch mark. Within the hour, the video clip of the announcement, dubbed Marcus's Power Play, was already trending on every news feed. She fled the Atlas Grill, trading the suffocating heat of the room for the sharp, cleansing chill of a November night. By the time she reached her small, chic apartment overlooking the Hudson, her phone was dead, overwhelmed by notifications. When she finally charged it, the text confirmed her worst fears, a polite but firm email from the managing partner at Starling and Associates, citing negative media exposure and professional liability concerns, informing her that her services were no longer required. Eleanor Vance was officially unemployed, publicly humiliated, and socially quarantined. The woman who had been building the foundations of a city now had no foundation left beneath her. Hours later, she found herself in a hidden, dimly lit lounge downtown, nursing a single, expensive glass of bourbon. It was here, in the shadow of her total collapse, that he appeared. Julian Thorne didn't enter a room, he claimed it. He was dressed in a suit of such exquisite, dark tailoring it looked less like clothing and more like a second, protective skin. Everything about him was sharp, the angles of his jaw, the cut of his hair, and especially the silver gaze that scanned the room with a cold, absolute control. He didn't approach Eleanor, he simply settled at the table next to hers, an arrangement that somehow felt more intimidating than a direct confrontation. Eleanor Vance, his voice was a low, resonant rumble, cutting through the jazz music. A spectacular fall. Even for New York. She refused to look at him. Do you enjoy tragedies, Mr. Thorne? I enjoy leverage, Julian countered, pushing a small, black velvet box across the polished table. Inside, resting on the fabric, was a delicate, platinum phoenix pendant, its wings spread as if in mid-flight. I read the media coverage. I know why Marcus discarded you. Not for a lack of talent, but a lack of political infrastructure. A lack of useful, entrenched money. Eleanor finally looked up, her blue eyes flashing with weary defiance. I fail to see how a luxury jeweler is relevant to my current state of ruin. It's not a gift. It's an incentive, Julian said, his eyes never leaving hers. I have a problem, Miss Vance. A problem that requires a partner who is intelligent, who understands structure, and who has just been publicly scorched. A partner who now has a singular, focused desire for vengeance. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a confidential, utterly chilling whisper. I am offering you a contract. A marriage of convenience. 9 months. Eleanor almost laughed. And what does the contract entail, Mr. Thorne? My soul? Close, he said, producing a discreet tablet displaying a pre-drafted legal document. It entails your image, your intelligence, and your presence as my wife. In return, I offer 3 things. First, immediate capital, $2 million, to open your own architectural firm, Vance and Associates, free from any sterling interference. Second, I will provide you with the power and the audience to systematically destroy Marcus Sterling's political career. And third, you will get your reputation back, rebuilt stronger than before. He needed her for a pivotal reason. Julian Thorne was a financial titan, but his operations hovered perilously close to the gray edge of legality. He was trying to finalize a career-defining deal with the Citadel, an ancient, conservative financial conglomerate that valued stability, public legitimacy, and impeccable spousal image above all else. They needed a partner who looked clean. I need a wife who looks like you, Julian explained, his expression hardening. A professional, a genius, and above all, a phoenix rising from the ashes of a public betrayal. If I fail this deal, I lose everything. Worse, I become a target for the Obsidian Group, a rival syndicate that wants me removed permanently. This isn't just about money, Eleanor. My failure means my eradication. The stakes were staggering: $2 million, vengeance, a new life, and entanglement with a powerful, dangerous man fighting for his life against a brutal, shadowy organization. She had nothing left to lose but the shell of her old, compliant self. And the rules? Eleanor asked, her voice steady. Julian's lip barely curled. No physical intimacy. We will be partners, nothing more. You will never inquire about my past, and you will never, under any circumstances, leave the perimeter of my protected properties without my security detail. Your life is now my liability. Eleanor Vance, the woman who had always followed the rules of society, signed the electronic document. The ink wasn't just digital, it felt like a brand. The next morning, Eleanor was escorted by an armored car to Julian's penthouse in Tribeca, a minimalist fortress of glass and steel perched impossibly high above the city. The level of security was chilling, reflecting the life-and-death game Julian was playing. Her first confrontation was not with Julian, but with his gatekeeper, Isabella Thorne. Julian's younger sister and chief operating officer, Isabella was a mirror of her brother, cold, ruthlessly efficient, and fiercely loyal. "You're an unnecessary vulnerability," Isabella stated plainly, leaning against a marble kitchen island, her arms crossed. "You bring media scrutiny and a target on your back. Your contract requires you to adhere to the security protocols, not because Julian trusts you, but because I insist on keeping the perimeter clean. Prove you are a strategic asset, Eleanor. Or you will be removed." Eleanor felt a fierce, renewed surge of cold energy. She was no longer running. She looked at the city lights glittering outside the vast windows, a reflection of the life she was about to conquer. She had traded her ruin for a contract with death, and she would make sure she got her money's worth. The Phoenix had found its fuel. The game had begun. Part 2: The Calculated Gambit. The transition from disgraced former fiancé to Julian Thorne's wife was less a change in wardrobe and more an entire architectural renovation of Eleanor's public persona. Isabella Thorne, managing the transformation with cold, surgical precision, dictated every element, from the cut of Eleanor's hair, now sleek, sharp, and undeniably powerful, to the diamond on her finger, a rock so massive and rare it silenced speculation and screamed permanence. It wasn't the romantic declaration Marcus had offered, it was a financial and political declaration of war. Their debut was set for the Baccarat Gala, the social cornerstone of the season, a fortress of old money and institutional power. Eleanor's entrance was perfectly orchestrated. Julian was a man who moved in silence, but his presence was a gravitational force. Dressed in severe black and white, they moved through the crowd, Eleanor clinging to his arm, not out of weakness, but as an anchor to his terrifying authority. The air around them was electric with suppressed malice and open curiosity. Every eye was searching for the scorch mark, the evidence of her ruin, but found only the cold, unyielding polish of a woman remade. Marcus Sterling and Serafina Rhodes were waiting. They were positioned near the main donor's table, their smiles strained. When they saw Eleanor, Marcus's practiced political facade slipped, revealing pure, incredulous rage. Serafina, ever the master of glacial control, simply gave a sharp, assessing look that spoke volumes. "How dare you interrupt my acquisition?" "Eleanor," Marcus said, recovering quickly and forcing a condescending warmth. "I see you've found yourself a generous guardian. Congratulations, Julian. She's certainly decorative." Julian merely offered a ghost of a smile, pulling Eleanor closer. "Eleanor is anything but decorative, Marcus. She is my partner. Something, I understand, you tend to view as disposable." The sting landed precisely where Julian intended. Eleanor, however, had not come merely to exchange barbs. Her revenge was meticulously calculated, relying on the one thing Marcus had dismissed, her brilliance. Julian and the Citadel investors, a trio of stone-faced men known collectively as the Three Sages, were gathered around a large architectural model of the new $500 million public works project, the very initiative Marcus was heavily lobbying for and which the Obsidian Group was underwriting. The project was the key collateral for Julian's deal. If the Citadel believed the project was sound, Julian was secure. Eleanor listened, absorbing the technical details of the structural integrity reports and funding mechanisms. The Obsidian Group's operative, a man named Victor Holt, was presenting the design as a masterpiece of efficiency. "It is a triumph of engineering," Holt declared, gesturing to the model's base. "Built on the most advanced composite foundations." Eleanor stepped forward, her architect's mind instantly spotting the deliberate, mathematically precise flaws. It wasn't incompetence, it was a systematic, calculated deception. The foundation details Holt presented were perfect on paper, but utterly unsuited for the actual geological composition of the designated site, a fact she knew intimately from her previous work with the City Planning Commission. The design was meant to fail spectacularly within 5 years, allowing the Obsidian Group to siphon off the remaining funds as emergency remedial action. She waited for a bit of absolute silence, then spoke, her voice clear and carrying, cutting through Holt's droning confidence. "Mr. Holt, while the design is aesthetically pleasing," Eleanor began, tapping a specific load-bearing point on the model, "the specifications for the high-tensile composite piles appear to be optimized for granite bedrock. Yet, the 2019 environmental impact study for this specific district, Zone Delta 7, clearly indicates a geological composition of 70% saturated clay and a high water table. Using this composite would lead to catastrophic structural settlement within 3 years, not 5. You are not building a foundation, you are building a timed demolition project. And the cost overruns for the inevitable failure are precisely what the Obsidian Group intends to claim from the public fund." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Holt froze, his face draining of color. The Citadel investors exchanged rapid, knowing glances. Eleanor had just pulled the rug out from under the entire Obsidian Marcus alliance, not with gossip, but with irrefutable, verifiable architectural truth. Marcus, realizing the depth of the exposure, tried to intervene, sputtering about her lack of clearance. Julian silenced him with a single, dangerous look. "My wife is thorough," Julian stated, a note of terrifying pride in his voice. "The Citadel values thoroughness." Eleanor's move was a double-edged sword. It proved her worth to Julian, cemented his deal with the Citadel, and delivered a crippling blow to Marcus's credibility, who had vouched for the project. But it also made her the central, exposed target of the Obsidian Group. The retaliation was immediate. 2 days later, a crane at one of Julian's lesser-known construction sites collapsed. No one was seriously injured, but the timing was a blatant warning. Isabella, white-knuckled, reviewed the security footage. "They were sloppy, but the message is clear. They know you hit them, Eleanor. And they know how to hit back." That evening, a small package was delivered via an anonymous courier to the penthouse. It was a simple, black velvet box, identical to the one Julian had used to present the Phoenix pendant. Inside, however, was not jewelry, but a chilling relic, a heavily tarnished, thin gold wedding band, snapped cleanly in two. Eleanor stared at the broken ring, the symbol of a commitment violently severed. Julian walked in, having just been briefed on the delivery. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable control, was etched with a raw, panic fear she had never seen. He snatched the box and threw it across the room. "That's enough," Julian said, his voice clipped and ragged. "It's over." "What is?" Eleanor asked, walking towards him. "The contract." "I'm dissolving it tonight," he insisted, his silver eyes flashing with desperation. "I'll transfer the remaining capital and set up a trust fund. You can leave New York. Go anywhere. London, Hong Kong. I can protect you from a distance, but I cannot protect you here." He was terrified, not of the Obsidian Group's power, but of history repeating itself. The broken ring was a clear reference to his first wife, the one he had loved and lost 7 years prior, whose death was clearly linked to his dangerous life. "They're threatening you with my ghost, Eleanor. And I won't watch it happen again," Julian pleaded, the facade finally cracking. "Take the money and run." Eleanor didn't move. She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not the icy financial predator, but a man imprisoned by fear and haunted by loss. She realized that the initial desire for vengeance against Marcus had been completely replaced by something much deeper, a need to protect this wounded, controlling man, and a refusal to be defined as the person who runs when the fighting starts. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "I won't. I signed the contract for money and power, Julian, but I'm staying for myself." She walked closer, closing the distance Julian had instinctively tried to create. I refuse to be discarded by Marcus. I will not be discarded by you now because the fight got real. They think I'm a vulnerability? I'm not. I am your strategic asset. I'm the architect who saw the flaw in their design. I'm not running, and I will not let you face this alone. Her conviction broke the last of his carefully constructed emotional barriers. The contract had explicitly forbidden intimacy, but the rules were meaningless now, dissolved by shared danger and mutual defiance. Julian moved, not with the practiced grace of a socialite, but with the desperate need of a drowning man. He closed the remaining gap between them, his hands cupping her face, his gaze searching her eyes for the truth of her declaration. He kissed her. It was a collision of desperate fear and fierce, exhilarating resolve, a kiss that tasted like scorched earth and the metallic tang of battle. It was not a gesture of pleasure, but an overwhelming, raw confession. The contract was officially broken, redefined by the terms of a deadly, consuming love. They were partners now, without clauses, bound by the war they had just started. Part 3: The Decoy Project. The moment the kiss ended, the world didn't grow softer, it grew sharper. The danger was palpable, but now it was shared, a burden that solidified their partnership beyond the confines of a legal document. They stood in the silent, glass-walled penthouse, the broken wedding band lying on the floor, a testament to the price of Julian's past and the peril of their present. "The threat is personal now," Julian stated, his voice stripped of all pretense. "The broken ring means they know I care about you, Eleanor. They know my vulnerability." "Then we turn the vulnerability into bait," Eleanor countered, her mind already racing, shifting from the emotional shock of the kiss to the cold logic of counter-strategy. "The Obsidian Group must have a mole inside your operations. How else would they know enough to stage that accident, and more importantly, know the specific history behind that ring?" Julian nodded, the financial predator returning, now operating with a renewed, ferocious focus. Isabella, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped in, her initial disdain for Eleanor replaced by grudging respect. "We've audited every server log, every employee access file. The Citadel deal is the most heavily protected data we have. Only 3 people outside of this room had access to the full legal and financial package: Julian's lead counsel, my chief of security, and the legal network Marcus is using," Eleanor finished, the connection clicking instantly. "Marcus is engaged to Serafina Rhodes. Serafina's family controls the city's largest corporate law firm, Sterling, Rhodes and Associates. Marcus, even as a former client, has pathways to access privileged information regarding the projects he's lobbying for." Julian's jaw tightened. "Marcus. He's reckless enough, and desperate enough, to sell information." "He's a gambler," Eleanor confirmed, recalling the secret debts Marcus had always hidden behind his polished image. "But the political destruction he's facing after the gala wasn't enough to make him betray us to this level. The Obsidian Group must have leveraged something far more critical than money against him." Their investigation quickly confirmed her suspicion: Marcus had astronomical, undeclared gambling debts. He was selling information not just for profit, but for survival. But they couldn't just expose him, they needed to trace the exchange back to the higher echelons of the Obsidian Group to dismantle them completely. "We need to flush him out," Eleanor announced, grabbing a stylus and spreading a series of digitized blueprints across the penthouse's interactive table. "We need a lure, something irresistible, that forces the mole and the Obsidian Group to make a move in the open." Julian watched her, fascinated. She wasn't just an architect, she was a strategist who understood leverage and counter-design. "A decoy project," Eleanor proposed, tapping the stylus on a blank zone of Manhattan's financial district. "We create a fabricated blueprint for a billion-dollar luxury development in Manhattan, the Phoenix Tower. A project so massive and valuable that the Obsidian Group won't be able to resist taking the intel and trying to sabotage the funding." The plan was audacious. They would leak the fake project details, the decoy project, through Julian's most secure channels, ensuring only Marcus could intercept the file through Serafina's law firm access. Julian's team would meticulously track the file's inevitable journey from Marcus's private drive, through a burner line, and into the encrypted hands of the Obsidian Group. Over the next week, the penthouse became a command center. Eleanor immersed herself in the architectural forgery, creating plans that looked dazzlingly complex but were subtly riddled with internal flaws that only she, the original architect, could spot. Julian handled the financial engineering, fabricating the funding structure that was believable but instantly traceable. Isabella managed the security logistics, preparing the extraction team for the inevitable confrontation. The moment they confirmed the file had been intercepted and relayed, Julian initiated the final phase. They'll want a tangible exchange, proof that their investment in Marcus's betrayal is worth it, Julian reasoned. We arranged the handover for the next major piece of intel, a meeting that Marcus believes will finalize his freedom from debt. The location chosen was an abandoned, cavernous warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront, a place of shadows, echoes, and no witnesses. Eleanor refused to stay behind. I designed the trap, Julian. I need to be there when the prey enters. Julian argued, but the intensity in her eyes, the same resolution she had shown when refusing to leave, silenced him. He simply handed her a small, cold device. A panic button. If you press it, Isabella's team arrives in 40 seconds. Don't press it unless you intend to use it. The night of the handover was cold and damp, the warehouse floor slick with river mist. Julian and Eleanor stood near a single, harsh floodlight, projecting an image of exposed vulnerability. The grinding sound of a door opening signaled the arrival. Marcus Sterling walked in, not in a crisp suit, but in a heavy, anonymous coat. He looked drawn, haunted, and utterly defeated. With him were two imposing figures, heavy security detail from the Obsidian Group. Julian. Eleanor, Marcus croaked, trying to regain some semblance of his former authority. It didn't have to be this way. It always had to be this way, Marcus, Eleanor said, the sound of her voice echoing in the vast space. You chose the path of the parasite. You didn't just sell Julian out, you tried to destroy the city infrastructure for pocket change. That was unforgivable. Marcus stumbled over his words. You don't understand. They had me. They threatened Serafina. They said they would expose everything and ruin her family's name, not just mine. I sold the information to protect her. His confession was hollow, yet laced with a genuine terror. He was not a villain, but a coward caught between two giants. Regardless of your motive, you provided vital intelligence to a group that just tried to kill my wife, Julian stated, his voice flat, dangerously devoid of emotion. Your wife? Marcus laughed bitterly, a broken sound. You think I'm that stupid? It's a contract, Julian. 9 months. I know the terms. You need her image, but you won't risk her life. If I take Eleanor right now, you'll trade any information, any asset, to keep her clean and safe for the Citadel. In a sudden, desperate move, Marcus lunged, grabbing Eleanor's arm and pulling her in front of him, pressing something hard and cold, likely a hidden burner phone or a small weapon, against her back. The two Obsidian operatives moved to flank Julian. One word, Julian, Marcus warned, breathing heavily, the smell of fear and stale cologne thick around him. And I break her. Call off your attack dogs. Julian didn't look threatened, he looked disappointed. He simply shook his head, a faint smirk playing on his lips. You fundamentally misunderstand the difference between a contract and a commitment, Marcus. You also misunderstand my sister's planning. Before Marcus could react, the warehouse erupted. From the shadows of the high rafters and behind stacks of rusted equipment, figures emerge. Isabella's extraction team, working with the silent, seamless efficiency of professionals, moved with brutal speed. The two Obsidian operatives were neutralized instantly, taken down by non-lethal, high-precision methods. Marcus, momentarily stunned, loosened his grip on Eleanor. She wrenched free, stepping quickly behind Julian, who didn't even flinch. "You called them?" Marcus whispered, defeated. Julian ignored him. "Marcus Sterling," he addressed the defeated man, his voice resonating with finality. "Your political career is over. Your legal access is now terminated. But I won't just let the police handle this. The Obsidian Group must know the consequences of touching what is mine." Using his deepest connections within the Justice Department and the State Committee, Julian didn't just ensure Marcus was arrested for espionage and fraud, he ensured every detail of his death, cowardice, and complicity was leaked to the press. Marcus was not just jailed, he was obliterated from the public record, his reputation permanently tainted, a cautionary tale for anyone in politics. It was a more complete, and far colder, revenge than Eleanor could have ever planned. As the team secured the warehouse and Isabella supervised the collection of evidence, Julian turned to Eleanor. The danger had passed, leaving only the charged silence of their new reality. "I won't ever ask you to run again," Julian admitted, touching her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray lock of hair. "But you have to promise me you will always fight with me." "Always," Eleanor confirmed, looking at the chaos they had orchestrated together. The broken contract was now a steel bond. Part 4, The Vow of Fire. The journey back to the Tribeca penthouse was silent, yet everything had changed. The tension that had once been purely strategic, the calculated movements of two sharp minds engaged in a business transaction, was replaced by an intense, fragile vulnerability. They had orchestrated a stunning victory, not as partners in a contract, but as allies fighting for each other's survival. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the fortress, Julian poured 2 glasses of scotch, the amber liquid catching the city lights. He didn't offer the glass to Eleanor immediately. He walked to the window, gazing out at the vast, silent cityscape he controlled. "I need to tell you about the ring," Julian began, his voice low and heavy, filled with years of stored grief. It wasn't just a threat. The Obsidian Group knew exactly what they were doing. He finally turned, forcing himself to look at her. 7 years ago, I was reckless. I loved someone who was light, who had nothing to do with the shadows I operate in. Her name was Anya. I thought I could keep the two worlds separate. The night she died, it was ruled an accident, a faulty electrical panel in her studio. But I know it wasn't. It was sloppy, deliberate sabotage, a warning from a competitor I'd crossed. Julian's control finally wavered. The broken gold band was hers. They were telling me, if you love Eleanor, we will make her an accident, too. I brought you here for protection, Eleanor, but I ended up putting you in the crosshairs of my own history. He set the glasses down. I tried to send you away because I know, intimately, the price of my world. I can't lose you the way I lost her. I won't survive it. Eleanor walked toward him, placing a hand gently on his arm. His muscles were rigid beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. "Julian," she said softly, but with the steel that had defined her since the gala. "I saw you fight for me in that warehouse. You didn't just use your resources, you used your raw, primal instinct. That night at the Atlas Grill, Marcus dismissed me because I wasn't enough to protect him. You accepted me because I am enough to fight alongside you." She met his gaze, her eyes clear and unyielding. "I am not Anya. I am Eleanor. I am an architect. I see the flaws, the weak points, and I reinforce them. I knew what I was signing up for when I walked into your world. I refuse to be a victim, and I refuse to be a ghost waiting to happen. My contract stated that you would never inquire about my past. I broke that rule the moment I chose to stay. Your contract stated no intimacy. We broke that rule the moment you kissed me. That piece of paper is meaningless now, she stated, reaching for the signed document on the table and tearing it cleanly in half. I am not leaving. I choose the fire, Julian. I choose you, and I choose to stand with you against everything that haunts you. Our commitment is real. The contract is dead. That confession, the complete, irreversible rejection of the safe path, was more potent than any weapon they had wielded in Brooklyn. Julian finally understood, Eleanor was not a liability to be protected, she was a partner to be cherished. 6 months later, the city moved, unaware of the tectonic shift that had occurred in its most powerful circles. Vance and Associates had launched with breathtaking speed and success, securing lucrative, high-profile contracts, all under the discreet financial backing of Julian Thorne. Eleanor, now CEO, was revered as the Phoenix, a woman who had taken public humiliation and forged it into the most exclusive, in-demand firm in Manhattan. Julian, having provided the Citadel with the forensic evidence of the Obsidian Group's fraudulent designs, cemented his deal, officially transforming his operation into a legitimate, formidable financial institution. For business optics, however, the original 9-month marriage needed a clean conclusion. The lawyers are ready, Isabella announced, handing Eleanor the final, simple divorce papers one chilly morning. The termination of marriage is purely administrative. It maintains the clean slate the Citadel required for Julian's final board approval. Eleanor signed the papers, feeling a bizarre sense of peace. The legal document was just another decoy project. It allowed the world to believe the contract had been honored and dissolved, while their true commitment flourished, hidden within the walls of the penthouse. Julian was never going to leave things quiet, though. He was a man who understood the power of spectacle, and the greatest act of control was reclaiming the narrative. 3 days later, Julian hosted a private recommitment gala at the very location of Eleanor's public downfall, the Atlas Grill. It was a calculated risk, inviting the same judgmental elite who had witnessed her humiliation. The guests included Julian's mother, who had flown back from Europe for the first time in years, a tacit acknowledgement of Eleanor's stabilizing influence, and, surprisingly, a sobered, brittle Serafina Rhodes, who now managed her family's damage control rather than planning a political wedding. As the guests raised their glasses for a toast, Julian took Eleanor's hand, leading her to the center of the room, right where Marcus had stood months earlier. 9 months ago, Julian addressed the room, his voice calm, powerful, and demanding attention. I offered Eleanor Vance a contract. It was a cynical, strategic alliance meant to safeguard my business and avenge her honor. He looked directly at Eleanor, the rest of the room fading into irrelevant noise. Tonight, I stand in the same place where she was publicly discarded, and I tell you all that the contract failed. It failed because a piece of paper cannot contain the truth. He dropped to one knee, pulling out a heavy, dark wood box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was an emerald ring, massive and cut in the shape of a perfect, soaring shield, a symbol of strength and protection. The contract ended the moment you chose my war over your peace, Julian said, his eyes filled with a love that was absolute and terrifyingly secure. I don't offer you a contract, Eleanor. I offer you my life, my name, and my world. Will you marry me, knowing the flames you choose to walk through? Eleanor, CEO of Vance and Associates, the architect who had built her own empire from ashes, did not hesitate. Her smile was blinding, a final, victorious flash of the phoenix. Yes, Julian, she confirmed, placing her hand in his. I always choose the fire. The applause was deafening, no longer nervous or calculated, but a true roar of acknowledgement. The contract was officially, and brilliantly, overwritten by an eternal vow. Part 5, The Unwritten Clause, Epilogue. The formal marriage of Julian Thorne and Eleanor Vance took place 6 weeks after the recommitment gala, a small, fiercely guarded ceremony held at their Tribeca penthouse. It was not a public spectacle, it was a private assertion of power. Eleanor, now legally Eleanor Vance Thorne, carried the emerald ring, the shield, as a constant reminder that her life was now defined not by gold but by granite resolve. Julian completed his final approvals with the Citadel, solidifying his transformation into a legitimate global finance powerhouse. The Obsidian Group, though severely crippled by the evidence Eleanor had uncovered, had not vanished. They had simply dissolved into quieter, more insidious forms of opposition. They no longer risked open warfare, they favored erosion. Eleanor, navigating the exponential growth of Vance and Associates, faced a new ethical test, a subtle attempt to compromise her firm. A massive city project, potentially worth hundreds of millions, came with a caveat, a discreet, unspoken demand for an expediting fee, passed through a shadowy intermediary known to be linked to the remnants of the Obsidian network. It was the same corrupt game, played with smaller stakes, testing her new firm's integrity. She brought the proposal to Julian, not for his financial muscle, but for his judgment in navigating the shadows. They sat across their interactive table, now covered in Vance and Associates' blueprints rather than financial schematics, discussing the moral and strategic implications. "This is what happens when you win, Phoenix," Julian noted, leaning back, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. "The fire doesn't stop burning, it just moves to the low-grade embers. You can take the deal, ignore the bribe, and they'll find another way to sabotage you. Or you can refuse, and they'll blacklist you from city work." Eleanor, no longer the naive architect Marcus had dismissed, traced the flaw in the bribe structure. "The bribe is less a test of greed and more a test of silence. They want control over the city's regulatory process. If I refuse the deal and expose the intermediary, I get the blacklist, but I maintain VNA's ethical integrity. And if you expose them, you put yourself in the papers again," Julian countered, a familiar protective edge returning to his voice. Eleanor reached across the table, taking his hand. "We built the Phoenix Tower in a fake design. Now, we build VNA with real integrity. That is the point of all this, Julian. You gave me the power to fight for the world I want to live in." They used the leverage Julian had gained from the Citadel deal, a quiet, untraceable conversation with a district attorney, to neutralize the intermediary without a public scandal. The bribe attempt dissolved, the project went through legitimately, and Vance and Associates cemented its reputation as untouchable, ethically and strategically. Their life became a balance of two worlds, Julian's high-stakes, ruthless finance and Eleanor's elegant, enduring design. Isabella, now officially Eleanor's close confidant, once confessed, "Before you, Julian was a weapon. Now, he's a shield." One quiet evening, Julian found Eleanor looking at her initial contract, the paper she had torn in half now framed and displayed in her private study, the tear symbolizing the end of the necessary lie. "You framed the death certificate of our relationship?" Julian